Afternoon, good evening from Scottsdale, Arizona. This is Doug Brunke with Global Chamber. Thanks everybody for joining us from around the world. We have a really interesting program with some expert speakers about Africa today. The goal of our presentation today and discussion is what are the opportunities going on in Africa? How can companies around the world tap into that? And couldn't have asked for 5 better speakers regarding that topic. We're going to start in Indianapolis today, and we're very fortunate to have Gina Sheets, who's the Senior Fellow at Sagamore Institute. For everybody's sake, for all 5 speakers, their bios are online, and so I'll forego the normal type of background information. Suffice to say that these are 5 amazing people, and Gina, you are extraordinary. You've got some great experience both there in Indianapolis but on the ground in Africa, and so let's kick off with you. Tell us a little bit more about your perspective on what's going on in Africa and how can people tap in.
Good morning. Yes, and we are coming to you from Indianapolis, a little bit of a rainy day, but we know plenty of sunshine coming on, and we're excited to participate in this panel as we are looking towards the development on the continent of Africa. And basically, I would like to share covering what Doug said about opportunities and challenges and help as you're doing entry-level business into the continent of Africa. And I'm going to start focusing on help first. And one of the things that I think might be a big advantage to those of you that are listening today, whether you are representing a board, whether you are a board member, or you are an investor looking into business on the continent of Africa, I want you to be able to remind your constituency about how big the continent of Africa is. So very quickly, I am going to share a screen with you. Share screen. All right, take a look at that screen right now. This is the continent of Africa, and I want you to see how big it really is. All of the United States, including Alaska, Argentina, India, Western Europe, China, and the British Isle can fit comfortably on the continent of Africa. And so realistically, when we talk about business, and especially business entering into the market of Africa, we have to understand that that might not be realistic, and we really need to narrow down our focus. So can I switch this back quickly?
You can just stop screen. You can go and keep talking.
Okay, so I will keep talking as we take the screen off, and if you need this later on, contact the Global Chamber Metro office here in Indianapolis, and the staff, Wailing, will make sure that you can get that slide, because I do think it will help you in your focus. I think that's to narrow down your focus when you're looking at your entry market into Africa, whether it's a country or it's a particular region. Remember, there are either 54 or 55 countries on the continent of Africa. They are just as diverse as Africa is big. So that's probably the best piece of help and assistance that I think I can share with you today. And let's narrow down now and talk about opportunities. So we see how big and how diverse Africa is. Let's talk about your opportunities, and I like to focus on 4 strategies. So when you are looking at your business, I want to encourage you to focus on building your purpose, building your place, building your people, and building your permanence. And why do I use these 4 touch points, these 4 strategies underneath your umbrella of business strategy? Quite simply because when you are looking at these 4 initiatives before you ever go into your country or your entry target, it will help you through a lot of the challenges that you will meet. Focusing on building your purpose. Everyone has a mission statement. Everyone has a vision statement. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your structure, your organization, your policies that you put in place, and then understanding the environment in which you intend to operate whatever country on the continent of Africa. And they're all going to be different. Just because you're doing business in West Africa doesn't mean those same policies, those same guidelines, those same purposes are going to be the same in East Africa, definitely in the southern part of Africa, or in the northern part of Africa. It is very specific. Your sense of purpose also might have environmental, literally deforestation issues, land use issues, certainly the infrastructure of how you wish to operate, meaning how are you going to move product in? How are you going to move product out? One key thing to remember, trust, but verify. I'm anxious to hear from the rest of the panel today because we have some great folks who are doing strategic observations, networking, research gathering, and data gathering that can help you mine your information. But when you are looking as a consultant, you are looking as an attorney, you are looking as an accountant, those are the partners that you need to have as you're looking at your own business's success and strategy. So building your purpose, building your place. Once you understand whether or not your business truly will fit into the structure of where you are going to land, you need to be thinking about how you are building your place. I will tell you from experience, and not just agriculture experience, but business experience, absentee ownership will not work. So please make sure you're building your place, literally that you have a place, an office to land. And if you are needing a bricks and mortar operation, that you are on ground, on site, trusting and verifying the construction process as you're building that place. From experience, my husband and I spent 5 years, recently moved from the country of Liberia, where we literally built a place. We built Liberia's only agriculture research center. We committed 5 years to do that. In agriculture, we know from experience it takes 3 years to determine whether you're going to be profitable and how you're going to do that. And then it takes 2 years to reach that profitability level. I think that's the same thing as you're building place in any business. Next, you build people. Again, that trust and verify is very important here. You will run into experts on the ground, but a lot of times people don't know what they don't know. What does that mean? You should know your business before you're ever going into the market. You might not know about the environment, the nuances. You might be able to read about every rule, law, and regulation, but unfortunately, something else will be taking place. Other rules that are not written in black and white that you need to find out about. So therefore, you need the resources of the people on the ground there. And the worst thing that you can do is not come alongside your local team. You need to be building up your local team. A succession plan is really what you need to look and have in place so that as you stay invested, you've invested capital in infrastructure, you've invested capital in building and mortar, you've invested capital in your shipping arrangements or whatever that business structure looks like. You need to take time and invest in the people. Years time, sometimes depending on what country you're going into, the development of the people might take 1 or 2 generational changes. So invest in the people. And the third thing, so we've talked about investing in your purpose, building place, and building people. You need to be building permanence. Now, the true entrepreneurs out there, you're not looking for building purpose. A lot of times you're looking to build the next greatest best thing, and you're going to at some point make an exit strategy. But for those of you that are looking in long-term business relationships, you need to be thinking about how you build permanence into your marketplace. Those are the opportunities that I see as far as your business structure. The challenge are, I think I mentioned those when you're looking at laws, strategies, you are looking at rules and regulations. That could vary depending on what country you're operating in by the moment. So be flexible, be wise, and be diligent in choosing your partners. You're going to hear me say this again, trust, but verify for yourself. There are a lot of opportunities besides agriculture, which is an area that I really am passionate about, biosciences and life sciences, talking about healthcare initiatives now that are online 24-hour service, mobile healthcare services, I see as an opportunity, especially in the developing countries on the continent of Africa, where you can have your expertise. You might have a 2 or 3 frontline team, and you now have a mobile team someplace else in the rest of the world that can actually interact, look at your testing, look at the image in real time, make a diagnosis, consult back with the 2 experts that you have on the ground versus building a whole healthcare center, for example. Conservation issues and understanding conservation issues and sending in technical expertise is huge as long as you're training people. The other opportunity is in solar development, especially when you're looking at grain handling, food storage, and food preservation. Huge opportunity in solar development. So that was very quick and very brief. I look forward to hearing the rest of the panelists discuss and hopefully having time for question and answer.
You're looking at, not me, but you're looking at our next speaker, Erika. Thank you very much, Gina, and there will be time for questions. A couple things for those who are watching. Number one is you can ask questions along the way in the chat box, and so please feel free to write down your questions there. And then there will be opportunities at the end of the speakers, the 5 speakers, to ask questions as well. And so we are catching Erika here in Scottsdale, Arizona, at a really amazing and great time. She has been leading up to something that's actually starting this week, and that's something where she was specially selected by Stanford University for a 1-year assignment in Ghana to advance economic opportunities there. And she'll be talking a little bit about what the Stanford Institute is. She herself has many years of background and experience in Africa, and she'll be talking a little bit more about what opportunities she sees there, and since she's going to be right there on the ground, I'll bet she has a lot to say. Erika, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, everyone from Scottsdale, Arizona, and to all the different time zones that we are beaming into right now. Again, my name is Erika Amoako-Agyei, and I am in the process of transition at this point. Currently, moving into a role with Stanford University, where I'll be based, as Doug was mentioning, in Ghana, and I will be with what we call the Stanford Seed Program. And Stanford Seed actually is a program that stands for the Stanford Institute for Innovation and Developing Economies. And it's an initiative out of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And basically what we will be doing, and myself in the role of a business coach, is working with CEOs of African-owned enterprises, where we will be supporting companies that have gone through a 1-year process with Stanford University. And basically this 1-year process has been what we call a mini MBA program that has focused on their company where they are today. And these are already established companies that have a history of doing business. They're not startups, but they are at a point where they need to take their business to the next level. So they go through what we call a Stanford transformation program. And that is basically a 1-year process. And as a coach, myself and 2 colleagues, we're going in for the next 1 year to work and support these CEOs of these companies to help them execute their transformation plans. And so, and these companies that we are working with are in industries from everything from agriculture to technology to retail, so across the board. And so we are in the process. We'll be on the ground. I'm actually leaving the country on Thursday morning, so my world right now is in a bit of disarray as I get prepared, but it's an exciting venture nonetheless. But my background began in Africa almost 20 years ago with the IBM Corporation. I worked for IBM for a decade, and in that time I was started in the U.S., then I moved to Ghana, and I opened IBM operations in Ghana. I was the country general manager for IBM Ghana operations, and then I ended up supporting additional projects in Nigeria, in Liberia, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, and Cameroon. So my background is in technology, and from that assignment that I had with IBM in West Africa, I not only supported projects there, but we worked with locally owned companies who were our partners for the region. And the interesting thing about it was we relied on their expertise and their established place in the local economies to actually advise us. And so we did not go in directly. As a country general manager, my strategy was to establish relationships and authorize them as IBM business partners. And as IBM business partners, we supported them to support clients. And so that's how we operated. And that was the model that I thought was best for our operations, was to empower these companies to be able to serve local markets, to add and establish to their business lines, and also to incorporate into our supply chains locally owned companies in every aspect of what we did. So, and it worked out very well as a business strategy and as a business model. So after 10 years with IBM, when I did return to the US, the interesting thing is I started writing a lot more about our strategy and how we worked in Africa as a multinational company, and what we did differently. In our previous speaker was talking about, she mentioned several times about the trust factor. And I'm always, today I have, up until this point, I've been teaching on conducting business in Africa, and I teach it a lot from a cultural and a relationship standpoint, and I teach a lot about cross-cultural communications. And that has actually been my field of work over the past few years. I have a consulting firm where I actually teach global executives who are getting ready to expand into Africa, their operations. I teach a lot about conducting business in Africa and how you would conduct business differently in an African setting than what you would do in a US setting. And a lot of that starts with the relationship aspect of actually building a trusting relationship. And I realized that as an executive working in the African, on the global stage in Africa, one of the primary things that worked extremely well was taking time to actually establish those relationships, trusting relationships, and then building on that foundation to actually establish a working relationship. And when I saw missteps with colleagues who came in to support projects that we were working on, who were driven more by the time factor than the relationship factor, it always caused always prolonged situations rather than taking time to just really getting to know who your business partners are and letting them know that you're there for the long run and not just to sell a bill of goods and flying off to your next destination. So what I realized was that you could have all the technical skill in the world and you could be the best at whatever functional field you may be operating in, but if you don't have those relational skills to actually establish relationships and really good, effective relationships and taking time to get to know people, I found that was as critical, sometimes even more critical than what you know. So these are some things that I have shared, and I've been doing that on a consulting basis, working with global companies who really were interested in how we operated as a company. So now that I'm moving into a new role with Stanford University, where I'll be working with African-owned companies and supporting CEOs in these transformation plans. When I looked at opportunities that I see that over the years of working in Africa, working with expats going to Africa, one of the biggest opportunities I see still from Ghana to Nigeria to Mozambique to Equatorial Guinea to different markets that I've worked with expats and companies is actually housing. And housing in the sense of, affordable housing and housing that is just available for even rental. I still find that to be a very big market when it comes to just in general. I see a lot of global companies. There's a lot of opportunity when it comes to real estate, and providing housing has been something that's been a struggle. In many African countries, I know, for instance, I have a lot of experience working in Ghana. Rental properties, the requirement minimally typically is anywhere from 1 to 2 years upfront of paying rent, and it can be very scarce. And I know that in other countries, in Mozambique, we have a lot of expats that I've worked with that have gone to work there, and they will be promised a home on their exploration trip as an expat. And if somebody comes in and offers a higher rent, they can be notified that we've changed our mind or whatnot. And this really becomes a point of turmoil for people that are in transition, in the process of transition. So I say housing is one opportunity that still there's great potential for investors that are looking at and that can be anything from physical houses to apartments. So that's an area. Infrastructure in many African cities, there's a crying need for infrastructure. Roads is still, the road networks still need to be developed. From south to the northern parts of many countries that I've seen. So that is one area. Roads, rails, city planning. It was mentioned that energy technology, anything from solar. I know the power grids tend to oftentimes be pressed, so you have a lot of rolling power outages. Working in Ghana, working in Nigeria, that's always been a challenge. So energy is also another area where I see there's great potential. So that I will wrap it up there for now, and thank you. That's my introduction.
Fantastic. There's actually a couple quick questions
Okay.
That have come in. So the first one is from Dr. Joelle Martin, and she's a member of Global Chamber, and her question is, Erika, how do you define transformation? And kudos for the difference you are making.
Oh, well.
So a question and
Okay.
congratulations.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Transformation, basically, one of the things that we are focusing on is, Stanford's grand mission is to eradicate global poverty. And that's a grand mission. And how the means to that grand mission is seen as the ideal engine for driving transformation is through the private sector. So really entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, when it comes to working with the companies that are selected by Stanford, what we are looking at is, at the end of the day, how do we help these companies open up their markets? And at the end of the day, how do we create jobs? So how can we help them expand to create jobs, to create further opportunity for many youth? As many of us may be aware, the well over 60% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is under the age of 30, and there is a great need for jobs, and so our whole mission is to work with these entrepreneurs as the engine of growth, to help expand their markets outside of their immediate markets. A lot of the companies we deal with deal within the boundaries of their nations. So the idea is, how do we open up partnerships between African nations and increase trade within the region, and hopefully and ideally throughout the continent, and then eventually on an international basis. So what Stanford is looking at doing is building on its decades-long history of educating innovators in Silicon Valley. The whole idea is, how do we take this mindset, bring this mindset, and through practical business training to help these business leaders expand their markets and create jobs.
We also have one question from Yaya in Ivory Coast.
Okay.
And she's asking, does the Stanford Seed Program apply to companies outside of Ghana? My company is based in Ivory Coast with an African reach.
Yes, it absolutely does. In fact, Ivory Coast is one of the nations that we are dealing with. So we actually, I know we will be in Cote d'Ivoire sometime in October. So it's actually, right now it's Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and then we have some new countries coming on, Burkina Faso, Cameroon. So we are expanding quite a bit, and then we're also in East Africa as well. So we're operating out of Nairobi, Kenya, and several countries in East Africa.
Fantastic.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah,
So thank you for answering those.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Jonathan Mundell. He's joining us from Johannesburg today. He works and co-founded a company called In On Africa in 2007. And we're also catching him at an exciting time because, like Erika, who's going to Ghana this week, he's introducing a new research document that covers all 54 countries of Africa coming out this week. And so, Jonathan, thanks for all the great work that you've done since 2007, and we look forward, thank you for your membership in Global Chamber, and we look forward to not only hearing about the report, but also getting your perspective on opportunities that you see in Africa.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's very good to be here. Welcome to everybody. I hope everybody's finding the discussion valuable so far. And thank you very much to Erika and to Gina. I think they've already raised some very good points, some points that I was actually planning on discussing myself, so I might skip over those. But just to touch quickly as an introduction on what Gina mentioned about the size of Africa, I think that's really critical. Like she said, the understanding that coming into Africa, you're not coming into a single country, a single culture. There's very, very many specific idiosyncrasies and challenges and different opportunities across sector, across industry, and across country. And therefore, from our perspective, In On Africa is a research and intelligence firm primarily. We're also a publisher of African-related reports. But for the last 10 years, our bread and butter has been doing research and data collection and strategic work with clients who are looking at entering the African continent and better understanding the market and understanding the opportunities and also obviously importantly understanding the risks and how to mitigate them. The other point that I really identified very closely with that Gina raised was the importance of relationships, which Erika also spoke about, and relationships and trust and spending time to build up relationships and to really establish a good nature of trust and a culture of trust within your local teams, your local partners, and obviously also within your customers. So those were really some really key points, I think, that Gina and Erika raised that I just wanted to touch on to begin with. So In On Africa, we've been around for 10 years. I co-founded the company in 2007, where our headquarters are in Johannesburg, and we've got over 300 consultants across the continent. We've got on-the-ground presence in 33 different countries and also various strategic partners across the continent. We've worked in all 54 African states across all sorts of different industries and sectors. Our clients span private and public sector, and just in the last year we've done research and intelligence work in agri-food processing, the auto sector. We're doing a lot of work at the moment with the youth and with education and unemployment. We also are doing an increasing amount of work within the energy sector, specifically renewable energy, which Gina and Erika also mentioned, specifically the opportunities within solar, which I completely agree with. We're also doing quite a bit of work more broadly on renewable energy, clients from outside of Africa looking at what the opportunities are more broadly in terms of the provision of energy and to address the energy crises that a lot of African countries are continuing to experience. We also do regular work within the financial services sector. Most of that is largely consumer-based. Also oil and gas, where actually Erika mentioned about, well, in answer to the question about Cote d'Ivoire, we're actually coincidentally doing a project at the moment within the oil and gas industry within Cote d'Ivoire. We also do a lot of work within the security and defense sector, and we publish a monthly magazine called the Africa Conflict Monitor, looking at the impact of conflicts and terrorism on opportunities in Africa. And also, obviously, a lot of work within tech and telecoms and ICT. So our coverage and our experience is vast, and I think for that reason, when Doug asked if I could speak today, specifically looking at the opportunities, I was very excited about the opportunity, particularly because I feel we are very much on the front line of identification and the exploration of opportunities in Africa. And it's an exciting time for us, and it's an exciting time for Africans, and it's an exciting time also for companies and businesses and investors that are increasingly realizing the potential and the opportunity within the continent. And I think increasingly Africa is being seen far less as a dark hole that's all these challenges and risks and you need to stay away from, but actually realizing that despite the fact that there's a lot of challenges to get past, the opportunity is massive and exponential. So Doug did mention a report that we are currently finalizing. We'll be releasing very early September, called the Africa Country Benchmark Report, and it links quite closely to one of the challenges that a lot of our clients face specifically, and that's the understanding of the African market, the African consumer, better understanding of competitors, and it all from our perspective comes down to data and having a good understanding of what data is available, what data needs to be collected to really understand your market, to understand the culture, to understand the business environment and the regulations and the political makeup and stability and all those kinds of things. And what we've done with this Africa Country Benchmark Report is we've brought together over 19,000 data points across all different indexes and ranking systems and key statistics and indicators, ranging from business indexes, economic rankings, political indexes such as political stability and market freedom indexes and corruption indexes, and then also statistics focusing on society itself. So for example, looking at literacy rates and poverty levels, and also very interesting index called the happiness index. So we've really tried to bring together as much data as possible to look at it from a holistic perspective and not in silos and not in isolation, to try and give our readers the most comprehensive understanding possible based on the data that's available, and for us also to see where the gaps are. Because with the tech evolution and the data revolution going across the world, Africa needs to understand what data does it currently have, where does it stand, and we called it the Africa Country Benchmark Report so that we can really identify who the benchmarks are, who's doing well, why they're doing well, what lessons can be learned, and also vice versa. What are the countries that are perhaps not performing so well politically or economically or from a business point of view or a social development point of view? What are they doing wrong? What are they doing right, to really help everybody across the public and the private sector to be able to learn as many lessons as possible? So one of the challenges then is the lack of data, the lack of quality of data. And that's something that a lot of our clients struggle with a lot. And also, as Gina and Erika both mentioned, also a lack of understanding of the African context and coming into Africa with a Western mentality, thinking that you can do business the same way in Africa that you do it in the US or in Europe. And that's two of the key things that we really try to help our clients with as much as possible, is trying to understand the African context, that's country and industry and market specific, and also trying to come to terms with the data that's available, and then obviously then from our research division point of view, helping them to get the data that they need to understand the country or the opportunity even better. One of the other challenges that I wanted to mention is also the regulatory environment can sometimes be a big challenge for businesses that are entering Africa, that's particularly those that have not done business in Africa before. And also the fact that despite the fact that Africa is increasingly democratizing, there's still very much autocratic governments in many countries, and that poses a big challenge where the leaders of countries are calling the shots. making demands on the business community and creating economic policies that are benefiting themselves and not so much perhaps the business environment. So that's another key challenge that needs to be taken into account. Just to touch quickly on a couple of opportunities that I think Erika and Gina have both touched on, specifically obviously renewables. There was also mentioned about the youth of Africa, and I'm sure everybody listening today is aware of the fact that Africa is an incredibly young continent. Actually, the top 10 youngest countries in the world are all African countries, and combining that with the growing population and the growing middle class and the growing working class, the opportunities further down the line from a consumer point of view is big. Working class, obviously, you've got more people that are of a working age, so you've got opportunities for creating employment. So there's a lot of opportunities relating to the youth. And specifically, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're doing now increasingly is work with the youth. We're working on quite an exciting project to link the youth with the corporate sector in South Africa. But there's also a lot of other projects that are focusing on the high levels of youth unemployment, particularly in Southern Africa, but it's echoed across the rest of the continent as well. And also increasingly, there's innovation hubs popping up all over the place, and business incubators and programs to encourage entrepreneurship, which is another key opportunity, I think, because there's a growing culture of entrepreneurship and innovation in Africa, which is very exciting. And there's obviously so many opportunities that stem from that culture across industry. I mean, obviously the most obvious one is obviously the technology linked to the innovative culture with new apps and software and all these things that are popping up. So there's obviously a big opportunity there. So technology and innovation, renewable energy is another one that has been mentioned. And like Erika mentioned, city planning and infrastructure is key, particularly as Africa's urbanization is increasing. And there's a statistic that's becoming, I think, increasingly well known, that it's estimated that by 2030, 2035, more than half of Africa's population will be living in cities. And that's a key opportunity going forward that should be planned for in the present to be able to truly tap into those opportunities further down the line. I have been talking probably a little bit longer than my allocated 6 minutes, so I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. This is Doug coming in from Scottsdale and as our moderator. We do have some questions coming in, and they're going to probably best be saved for once everyone speaks, and so continue to ask your questions and we'll make sure that we get to them. Our next speaker is coming from Lagos, Nigeria, and Vivian Ohawuchi. Hopefully you'll correct my pronunciation. You'll notice that I didn't pronounce Erika's last name because I can't, and I apologize. But Vivian is with Calvary Transnational Limited, and she does project work, project development, client liaisons. And what's really interesting about her work and her experience is she's worked with many, many different brands and bringing them into Africa, including ones that are there, like the Nigerian Ports Authority and the Kenyan Tourism Board and Guinness beer. And so, Vivian, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing more about your cut and your perspective on opportunities in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Like introduced, my name is Vivian Ohawuchi, and thanks, Doug, for that beautiful introduction. I am a research personnel, but currently with Calvary Transnational Limited, which is a company that is into exportation of raw materials and agro products from Nigeria. And we also partner with a lot of intending investors that wish to come into the Nigerian market and explore opportunity and as well invest as well. So My experience spans across research. Like he said, I've worked with a couple of brands, and we've tried to advise intending investors as well on how to go about product development and the likes. So for this presentation, I'll be making it on behalf of Sir Christopher Ejike, who is the MD CEO of Calvary Transnational Limited, but he's unavoidably absent. But he might join us remotely during the question and answer section if he finds his feet on a settled place. So we'll be looking at opportunity spotlight, Africa, the Nigerian case specifically. This presentation is channeled to the Nigerian environment. A lot of us, beautiful speakers we've had earlier, have talked about so many things about Africa, and I think that has given us a holistic view of what happens in Africa. But I would just want to chip in that we all know that Africa, of course, is a very big continent, like Gina explained. She showed us the map that shows that every other country can actually tap into the African continent. And then Africa, of course, provides raw material and food to vital parts of the world. And we have specific countries that are known to give a lot of raw materials and products on a global space. Of course, Nigeria is known for raw cassava, shea nuts and hibiscus flower. Cote d'Ivoire is known for raw cocoa, and Tanzania for raw cashew nuts. But then for this presentation, our focus will be on Nigeria as a center of derivation. And looking at the Nigerian economy, of course, our population is at the moment over 180 million. And of course, we have over time been known to be really dependent on oil and gas as our source of revenue. But with the statistics of the Nigerian economy in the last 2 years, ranging from 2015 till date, the country has had a backdrop in terms of economic development, especially with regards to the drop in the oil price in the oil and gas sector. And this has caused the Nigerian government to look internally and look towards development of other sectors. So there's a lot of diversification going on in the economy. And from projections from the economic team, we are looking at having a 1% growth in 2017 and 2.5% in 2018. Next slide, please. So now a little about the Nigerian sectorial analysis. From the infrastructural point of view, we see that Nigerian is looking at having a much larger growth by 2020. And of course, infrastructure opportunities exist in various sectors, talking about the ICT sector, the social infrastructure sector, the vital registration and security, energy sector, transportation sector, agricultural sector, and many others. And then we're looking at a total investment of about $3 million to bring about this needed growth. And then you want to wonder why people would want to invest in Nigeria. There are a lot of opportunities that exist in Nigeria, irrespective of the current economic situation. And these opportunities range from the power sector to agricultural, transportation, solid minerals, and of course, the oil and gas sector. Then we're going to be looking at these sectors individually. For the power sector in Nigeria, Nigerian economic sector relating it to power suffers endemic power disruptions, and this has affected growth rate in the economy to a large extent. Of course, every sector of the economy depends on power, like is notable in other parts of the world. But because of the inadequacy in the supply of power in the country, of course, at the moment we have 3,000 megawatts of electricity supplied, as opposed to 160,000 megawatts that should be able to provide local electricity demand. So this creates a huge gap, and of course a massive investment opportunity for intending investors. Areas in the power sector that could likely attract investors' attention are expansion of existing facilities in generation, transmission and distribution, manufacturing of wire, cables, transformers and other auxiliary equipment, building new integrated power plants, expansion of existing transmission lines, production and distribution of metering devices, and of course provision of opportunities and maintenance services. So the federal government of Nigeria has developed a power generation package that makes it, please go back to the other slide. The power sector of Nigeria has created a big package, power generation package for investors that intend to invest in this sector. So it is actually an area of the economy that intending investors might want to look into. Then the next sector we'll be looking at here is the oil and gas sector. The oil and gas sector, yes, it has suffered loss in the last 2.5 years because of the drop in oil prices, but yet this sector still has opportunities available for people who want to invest, because yes, we have about 4 refineries in Nigeria. We have 2 in Port Harcourt, and we have 1 in Kaduna and 1 in other country. But these provision of necessary facilities, and this has left the refining capacity of the country to be at a very reduced rate. So investment in these sectors can go a long way to help boost the production of transmission and of course conveyance. And there's also the service sector in the oil and gas industry, which in turn investors can look into investing into. Then the other sector, again, in the Nigerian economy that avails investors opportunity is the agricultural sector. In the agricultural sector, we all know that Nigeria is a country that is enriched with, of course, so in the agricultural sector of Nigeria, a lot of farm produce are generated within the country. This includes cereals. You talk about other products like the and a lot of other produce which are cultivated in Nigeria. But one very big gap in the Nigerian agricultural sector is that processing of this product is a very big challenge. A lot of foreign partners, for instance, that is where Calvary Transnational Limited is really streamlined. A lot of international partners that would want us to export our products to their own country. For instance, at the moment, we're working on establishing a processing plant in Michigan. Our CEO has traveled with regards to this to see how this can further be implemented to help us bridge the gap of quality control that currently exists, because you find out a lot of countries will want you to export most of your produce to their country, but because of the limitations we have with processing, this limits what can be done in terms of exporting these products. You find a lot of rejections with regards to drop in the standard, drop in the quality of this product. So that is an area where investors can look at investing into to help generate a lot of processing technologies or facilities that will help to bridge this gap. Then the next sector, of course, which has been mentioned by most of the speakers, especially Erika and Gina, are the transportation sector. Of course, in Nigeria, the transportation sector, you have that most of the sectors are yet to be tapped into, particularly the maritime sector and of course the railway sector. This sector, you find out that because of underutilization, because there has not been massive investment in these areas, the road transportation system is really congested. You find a lot of times when products do not get to delivery sites on time, a lot of accidents happen and things like that. But if there is concentration in improving the maritime transportation sector and of course railway transport, this is going to bridge a lot of gap and help to cut down the dependence on the road. Because in Nigeria, you found situations where a lot of trucks, which are supposed to ordinarily move to other routes, or products are transported through trucks. These are supposed to be conveyed through other routes, which are not at the moment available. If in Nigeria you have situations where goods can be conveyed via the railway transport system or of course the maritime transport, this reduces the burden on the routes and makes the routes easily accessible to mainly motors that could carry just individuals. So that is another area of the country that needs to be explored. And then another part of it is the solid minerals sector. This sector, you find out that there are a lot of solid minerals that exist in some countries, some states in Nigeria. We have iron ore, we have coal, tin ore, gold, columbite and tantalite, you have lead, zinc and the rest. These are all very much abundant in Nigeria, but the area is yet to be explored, but basically because the facilities needed to enhance processing of these techniques, these products are not available. So investors can also look into this area to be able to boost their business terrain. But then in Nigeria, some of the limitations to investment has been mentioned or captured by most of our earlier speakers, you talk about relationship management, you talk about building trust, you talk about trying to understand the cultural context. And this is where we as Calvary Transnational Limited come in. We try to help you to create that alliance between you and probably the intending state government where you would likely want to invest. We provide advice as well, advisory services on areas where these resources are available and how you can penetrate such areas. The governing team and of course the local partners available to be sure that you get your business to the right pedestals. So also part of the things we do is also the development of modular petroleum refinery. We already have existing contracts with some intending investors who want to explore these areas, development of power generation stations in Lagos to meet up with increasing demand of power, development of 3,000 hectare cassava farm, and establishment of ethanol plant using cassava as the source of mineral. And again, development of raw material cashew processing and packaging plants for local and international markets, development of mining sites and marine transportation. So at the moment, that is what we do at Calvary Transnational to try to bridge the gap that exists with regards to investment in these areas. So intending investors can partner with us to see how they can bridge the environmental gaps or cultural gaps that exist in Nigeria to see that they'll be able to give their businesses a landing surface. So thank you very much.
Connection continued, and we heard almost all of that. It's just as a reminder for everybody, this is being recorded, and so you'll be able to see this afterwards. So in the next week or so, we'll be able to communicate this out, so it'll be living in posterity. We now go to Demba, and Demba is from Senegal. Demba is the founder and director of Strategy First, and so we've heard a lot of very specific information, and we thought we'd kind of finish the speaker presentations with kind of a strategy review of, like, you're a company wherever you are around the world, what should your strategy be going after some of these opportunities? Demba, today you're in DC. Please share with us your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon for some, depending on where you are, and good ladies and gentlemen. Executives, investors, entrepreneurs, and business owners. My name is Demba Agyei, as he just introduced, an insurance and financial services expert specialist with Strategy First LLC in the East Coast in DC over half a decade now, with extensive interest in community economic development, communication for development, and communication applied to precision agriculture with commodity markets within the region, with focus to sub-Saharan Africa, of course. And today, as we look into the landscape of investment opportunities in Africa, although the image as provided by most all-guard media is bleak, there are indeed major structural shifts happening right before our eyes. Decades, those happened in the last decade that have contributed to flipping the coin, so to speak. So for those investors actually and companies seeking opportunities in Africa, you have no more excuse being left behind, definitely, because from listening to Gina, Erika, and what just Jonathan shared with us and Vivian in terms of information and possibilities in terms of expanding or building from scratch, whatever it is that you want to do, the information is out there. So the information is out there in a sense. You hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not saying, okay. Okay. The information. Okay, it looks like I lost you. Something happened. Let me check.
We can still hear you.
Oh, okay, that's good. All right, so it's on me then. So yeah, I was just saying, no, from whichever corner you take it from, the information is out there. Development in Africa combined with having the economies of today's advanced nation. limited to irrigation, agriculture and nutrition, mining, infrastructure, security, insurance and financial services, right on my alley. And in between aggregates value chain in each one of these sectors. All such areas to pinpoint where strategy first can help strike the most comprehensive agreement framework with African entrepreneurs, governments still dealing with the overhead of those processes. I heard Jonathan's work right now in terms of work. Those are areas and assistance that almost companies help with, because you're dealing with your customer, you're dealing with knowing the country where you, and that's exactly what it is about. Okay, it looks like okay. I'm sorry, but I'm losing the connection here on my screen for the.
I think you just need to keep moving forward. We can hear most of what you're saying.
Okay, yes, all right. So from what I've heard from previous presenters, definitely, there's a lot to be said in Africa in terms of where we are, in terms of opportunities. I think where we need to look at is to understand how big the continent is, big not only geographically in terms of size, as the map that Gina shared from the get-go. We're looking at the Africa as it is today standing, to give you an idea of the scope of what we're dealing with here. For the year 2008, collective GDP was nearly 1.6 trillion, equaling Brazil's or Russia's. And you have $860 billion, which is Africa's combined consumer spending in the year of 2008. 16 million is the number of new mobile phone subscribers since 2000. And you have 60%, which is Africa's share, or total amount of uncultivated and arable land. Think about it, of investment that can profit any business seeking to really rectify and develop their business model. This presentation, unfortunately, I cannot see it on mine. I need to reconnect on that feed right here. Just to mention, next 20 would be the number of African companies. Have the number of 20 companies in Africa have revenues of at least $3 billion. As of today, right now, moving, breathing. But when we look at it's like those kind of simulations going after. This after is dealing with what would be Africa moving forward in terms of opportunities and market gap for the next 3 years, because we're talking about 2020. I heard Vivian just mentioning 2020, but it's just 3 years from now. GDP for Africa's collective was nearing 2.6 trillion by 2020, and $1.4 trillion for Africa's consumer spending capped by the 2020 as well. 0.1 billion, which is the number of Africans working age by 2040. And I heard just what Vivian was talking about in Nigeria with regard to the population, very young as well. And I think those are areas of concern for any business investors, and realize there's a lot to do in this area. Opportunities is there. I mean, the opportunities are there. Let's talk about some challenges. And the most one challenge that you all realize, and as mentioned earlier by Gina's development, of visibility of both investors and potential investors the Morgan Stanley Capital Market International and S&Ps and other couples of other rating industry standards, sometimes they're very specific or too broad enough to instill some bias when it comes to Africa's true work. And that's why, Jonathan, I would be very interested in having an idea of the type of work you're trying to do in that benchmarking work you just mentioned, which might be of interest to me as well in my work. So, challenge I would say in Africa is about the moral hazard. The KYC, know your customer, know your client concept is something definitely of interest to any investors. You need to know how to go about this culture in a different setting, environment, culture-wise. That we need to focus on a minute. And the third point, which I identified in our operational diagnosis, is the lack of public, which is, as you all know, detrimental to the ownership, which is itself guarantor of any project survival. Investors go there, companies go there, and just strike deals with governments and end up not having the public buy in. And this is something that can do or break your business. So we need to focus on that. And the fourth point, which is a challenge that most have experienced it, cost of optimism bias. Which is of nature to influencing decisions in policy planning and operational management in year and place of agreed standards. The other fifth issue we mentioned, we identified as challenges would be the cost of monitoring and evaluation. You were accustomed to the U.S. system, to the system of monitoring and evaluation. When it comes to doing business on the ground, rational. And I think previous commentators just of the culturally different environment in Africa are harder for investors or lenders to predict, period. Meaning here that now you once have done all your due diligence to bring the bacon home, think about political risk and non-commercial risks and all correlated with transfer restrictions in some countries, and the issue of inconvertibility of your money, of your currency. Think about breach of contract, which happens all the time. Think about expropriation and civil disturbance. Well, the good news is, since last year, 2016, Africa has now the regional hub of the MIGA, which is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which is subsidiary of the World Bank, now in Africa, dealing with those extreme risks that no business can stand on their own. So what does this do? Actually, it brings a new leverage for investors and companies seeking to do business in Africa, because the environment is more prone to accommodating those business requirements than it has never been before. So those are the things actually I wanted to share. And fortunately, back onto my slides, and I hope you have it up on. But most of the information I have are going with those levels of possibilities. We have opportunities, but a significant historical event that happened when the United States government decided to award $13 billion to Europe for the reconstruction. That amount of money helped Europe build and develop to a point where they can do business with the United States to this day. Compare that level of investment magnitude needs today in terms of what's really making Africa still back on the, is that we still don't have that level and magnitude or this kind of money, and this has been going on forever. So that's why we believe private sector is the now new initiative, the new partnership that Africa can rely on and do business with. But doing so, when private business companies come to Africa, they need to really focus on instilling in their work social responsibility framework. Without that, they cannot sustain the cost of doing business over time in Africa. going to stop there because I don't have the element just to comment on as it goes with the slides on my system. I have to connect again in the system and expect to maybe answer some Q&A as you go. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Demba. Sorry about the bad connection, but mostly I think we heard what you had to say and we saw some of your slides. So we do have a number of questions coming in for the panel, and maybe this is something, I mean, you guys were talking about some big opportunities and all over the place in terms of really spectacular opportunities over the next decades. But here's something that maybe is a little bit of a more of a micro question relative to the current situation. This is from Gregory Brown of Global Chamber in Kansas City. What is the impact of South Africa's currency problems on other African countries? So can anyone, does anyone on the panel feel comfortable answering that question? Maybe Jonathan, you're sitting right there.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not an economist, so don't take whatever I say into any decision-making or policy decisions that you're putting in place, but certainly from my understanding and from the work that we're doing within South Africa and our understanding of the business environment, the impact certainly does extend past the borders of South Africa. I mean, obviously, most relevant and most impactful would be the countries that share the currency with South Africa, being Lesotho, Swaziland, and Namibia. So they're obviously directly impacted. The other implication would be lower spending power for South Africa, with South Africa being a big trade partner and investment partner for many other African countries. And with the downgrade in South Africa, the economy not being as good as it has been previously, there's less investment and less trade being done by South Africa with the rest of Africa. So from a currency sharing point of view, monetary sharing as well, not just those countries that rely solely on the rand, but also countries like Mozambique and Zimbabwe, who do sometimes use the rand as part of their currencies and the transactions that they're doing in the business environment. So from a monetary point of view, certainly there's that extended impact outside of South Africa, but probably the bigger impact is the influence that it's had on South Africa's relationship and trade and investment practices across the continent. So it is certainly far-reaching, and hopefully the situation does improve in the coming months.
Very good. Thank you. And certainly any of the panelists can come back to that question. I'm going to go to the next question from an anonymous attendee. We're not sure who this is from, but it's a good question. In general, recognizing that there are 54 countries on the continent, how well do local primary and secondary education systems support Africa's enormous business potential? And then what role, if any, can maybe playing off of what Demba talked about in terms of private companies stepping in, what role can businesses play in developing Africa's current and future workforce? Anybody want to tackle that one about education? It looks like from Stanford University, yeah. Right? We've got Erika here. So well, what do you think?
I'll just say that from previous experience working with multinational companies, one role that I have played has been in an advisory capacity to many of the decision makers of multinational companies that are now branching into African nations. And one of the biggest complaints that multinational companies that I do hear from HR or people in hiring capacities is the lack of skilled workforce. There's a large potential workforce to recruit from, but a lot of, for instance, somebody might have an engineering degree or a degree in information technology, but may have no practical hands-on experience with an actual PC, but has a lot of theory expertise, but hasn't had a chance to actually execute or even practice in an environment to practice. So in an advisory capacity as a consultant, when I work with companies, I oftentimes advise that what is critical is to create, as part of your strategy in entering those markets, create training. So if you recruit, you can recruit based on maybe someone having a degree on paper, or even just some knowledge in a particular field. But it's critically important, and I think it's the burden should be on the companies to bring in training, practical business training. Recruit young people, bring them in, and incorporate as part of their onboarding some actual practical business training, because that is what we're lacking in the school systems. Oftentimes what you see in the secondary school systems, even at the tertiary levels, is a lack of actual practical business training. So that is one of the ways that I think the private sector can close the gap when it comes to the education gap. And that's one of the things that we partnering, Stanford University, going in to partner with companies, one of the gaps that we want to close is that education gap, where we also are looking at, and we have in the past brought in students, and we have students who come in and actually intern at the companies that we are working and supporting to help transform their companies onto the next level. So I think that's also very much incumbent, I think, on the companies coming in. How do you add, instead of bringing in expats, the goal of an expat's job is to phase yourself out. You're not there to just sit and enjoy and be in a nice compound. You're there to transfer skills to local community, to someone who can use that job and pass those skills onward to the next generation. So my thing when I'm training and I'm teaching expats, my thing is you are there to phase yourself out. It should be a very long-term but short-term view. Over the next 2 to 3 years, who am I going to transfer all my skills to that is someone that is local, that lives there, and that can benefit from a long-term career advancing position. So that's my contribution with that.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to say about the education system and the opportunities there?
Yeah, Doug, I can add something. I mean, I mentioned that we're doing quite a lot of work with the youth, specifically in South Africa, but the issues, particularly youth unemployment, do obviously extend across the rest of the continent. And in answer to the question, specifically the last part of the question, what role can businesses play in developing Africa's current and future workforce? I think there's a huge role for them to play. And one of the findings that's coming out of our research, specifically with students and the youth, is that job readiness and skills development is lacking. And because of the substandard, in many cases, level of education, students are getting out of school and out of university, but not actually prepared for the working world. And that can be very easily addressed through more internship programs, more part-time work opportunities that businesses are offering students to give them some exposure to the working world before they actually enter the workforce. And another thing is a lot of these businesses have a certain requirement, a time requirement in terms of how much work experience recruits need to have. And that's placing a very big challenge on new graduates to get jobs because they don't have the work experience. But through collaboration between the private sector and the education, the tertiary institutions specifically, and even the primary and secondary institutions, through that collaboration where the businesses can actively be providing work opportunities, even if it's just more part-time work, and just getting the students exposed and getting them some work experience and preparing them for the workforce. And I think it also links to the culture within the millennial culture that it's not like 10, 15, 20 years ago where you as a youth felt a lot more responsibility and there was a need to prepare yourself for the working world. But now I think with the technology age, the millennials just feel like everything's going to be handed to them, and once they get out of university and they're ready to enter the workforce, they don't really know what's hit them. So I think in closing, there's a massive role that the corporate world needs to play, and I think they need to be doing that in collaboration. I think one of the other issues is that there's a lot of great companies out there that are trying to get the youth involved, and they're running really great programs for the youth, but they're not working hand in hand. So you've got these great initiatives that are that are being implemented in silos, and continuously the wheel is being reinvented, which I think is another problem, that there needs to be more collaboration between the businesses, not just the businesses getting involved, but them actually working together.
Sounds good. Another question we have that's come in, I believe this is an anonymous question as well, and this goes back to you, Gina. Could you explain more on what you mean by building permanence?
Yes, I can. Oh, sorry about that. Are you hearing the feedback?
Yes. You may have two open lines there in Indy.
Yeah.
Just need to shut one down.
Okay, now I think that's better.
Beautiful.
Yes, building permanent. Erika said it as well. It's that succession plan. Building permanence for any business is going in and not looking at your entry market strategy, but actually looking at what your strategy is in a year, 5 years, 10 years. It's to make sure you have that plan in place that when you are not there, when your team that you are taking in to set up the business is not there, that your business can continue. And it goes in par with developing the young people, developing those resources. One of the things that I see actually as a business that can be developed, at least in experience in West Africa, is developing a platform of educational online resources where textbooks, quite honestly, at least in Liberia, it's an issue for students to have, every single student to have a textbook in their hand when they enter into school. As a matter of fact, most of the elementaries, including secondary schools, don't have a textbook for every student. But yet every student nowadays seems to have a smartphone or a tablet. So to be able to exercise resources as far as textbooks online, huge opportunity for business development in West Africa. And that succession plan or building permanence begins right there in that elementary and secondary school level, where you can actually build a platform where students and teachers can go on and access those resources at any point and any time. One of the things, the electrical current, the electricity infrastructure might not be very stable, but I do find cell phone networking and that infrastructure, internet access, to be fairly stable nowadays, which is quite a dichotomy, right? But I do think that that is the opportunity to build business and building people, which will help you build the permanency.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Another question that we have kind of relates to the transition that Africa is doing now over the last couple decades. I saw something on this just in the last few days regarding, Africa's not looking for handouts. They're looking to be integrated into the world economy. And that may be right or may be wrong, but at least that was the point of the article. And here's the question that's come in. Several studies have shown that well-meaning, well-intentioned NGOs are actually undermining African economies by providing imported goods and food for free that could be produced in country by local communities for local profit. Are there initiatives in place to replace such NGO activity with local business development? If so, how well are those initiatives working?
I'm not aware of any organized initiatives, quite honestly. I think that's a government top-down decision. And I say that, actually, I can think of a couple presidents. Kenya, in particular, comes to mind, saying we are going to develop ourselves. Rwanda is another good example of a government initiative. So when I say I don't know of any initiatives, I don't know of any NGOs that have announced to the world, we're going to get out of the business of being an NGO. I think where a lot of smaller NGOs have gone in to say, we are coming alongside people and we are developing people so that we can get out of the way in providing. I think you heard me say before that the wisdom is being able to come in and say, tell me what your strengths are and how can I align to those strengths. Unless it's an emergency, a disaster relief assistance where you come in and say, tell me what you need, I think that's a very dangerous question. I think the question to put permanence in development is say to come in and tell me where you are strong, where your assets are that can be further developed, and how can I get you to that level. I think that that is the best resource that anyone looking into development, not aid, development can extend, is to extend that question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Anything else on that one? And if not, certainly you can include any answer to any question that we've had along the way. I'd like to kind of go around the panel, if you will, maybe starting with you, Demba, in terms of some of the things that you're involved with and that you talked about. How can people get involved?
Well, the best way to get involved, as you know, is first of all to get to know, first of all, identify the level of interest you have for any given country. I mean, the Africa is big. Think about those English-speaking countries, those French-speaking countries, from where I come from, Senegal, which is one of them. If you look at even international aid, the way it's going, actually, some of the best chunk the French-speaking countries used to say are going to the English-speaking countries, because most donors traditionally by affinity go to the people of language choice. That's just an overall statement idea they have. I was just listening to Erika saying the country where she's active involved right now, but I think the French-speaking countries from your program are very limited, right?
Yes.
Okay, that just gives an indication. And that's why I'm saying when we migrate and we from the diaspora we are here, we know all those levels of limitations happening first place. And when we are here, we tend to work with we can use of to make sure that will not further impact those countries, French-speaking countries, just the language barrier. But then I think the first step would be to try to know those environments out there and communicate to them in a culturally competent manner, which is actually the bottom line. We need to start by that. You just cannot get someday in a country just right from the airport saying, hey, you want to meet the government and do things and move along. You need to spend some time, as I say, you have to give time to time to understand how these things work and likely doing business the way they would expect you to work with them. I mean, right now, if you look at dealing with, I would use it like the China's invasion. I would say China is on the table, not as the U.S. standards anyway, as international Western standards. So these are things to help undo, but as most of you have already experienced doing business in Africa, library is there and all those things, and that's a culture. So anything we need to do to make sure those coming in would not get bogged down by those things would be, a good way to start in conveying the information out there. So that's just what needs to be done. We need to get in properly and with the right people, the right information, with the right guidance. Work it out.
Okay, thank you, Demba. You referred in your conversation there regarding so many different countries, and once you decide which country, those kinds of decisions are made with some of the information, Jonathan, that you have and that the report that's coming out have. Could you address the question kind of overall, how do people get tied in? And then, in terms of as they decide to jump into Africa or to modify their activities going forward, how do they use some of the information that you now have available to make better decisions?
Thanks, Doug. Sorry, I was on mute. I think the most important thing is to utilize the information in strategy, like what Demba was talking about. You need to ensure that you're getting as much reliable information as possible across all spectrums. Not just on the economic environment, or if you're concerned about political stability or whatever it might be, to really have a very holistic understanding of what's going on in the country, what are the dynamics within the political, business, economic and social sphere, and really get in touch with what's going on the ground. And I think that's one of the issues that we pick up a lot is there's very skewed media coverage, as I'm sure everybody knows. And so the perception of what's going on the ground in Africa is quite different from a media exposure point of view to what really is going on the ground. And that comes back to a couple of points that were mentioned earlier about the importance of local presence and local partners, because if you're working as a sort of satellite business and think you're going to be able to enter Africa without any real presence and on the ground physicality, it's going to be very difficult. So I think from our perspective, the importance of the data is immense across the private and public. I mean, without data, it's very difficult to make informed decisions. And from our perspective, that's the most important thing about the work that we do, is through the research that we're doing and the analytics that we're doing to really interpret that data, we're helping to inform better decision making, which in turn is influencing growth and progress on the continent. So in answer to the question, I hope this does answer the question, I would say that it's necessary to use data to inform decision making and not base decisions on conversations that are being had at a high level, and those conversations then becoming very much a top-down approach, like we just mentioned from a funding perspective, but to really be using the data that's available to inform your decision making and also to inform your strategy in terms of what other data is needed. Don't just rely on the data that's available, because in many cases in Africa there isn't a lot of data, and not to be sort of promoting our own business, but in essence, research in Africa is critical. So if you don't have the data that you need to make decisions, then you need to go and get that research done, so that the decision making that you're making from a business point of view, or even policy making within governance and more broadly speaking the private sector, decisions being made on the education sector, on how to work on poverty alleviation, all these kinds of things, it all has to come down to good quality data.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. And that report, when is that report coming out?
Early September. So I've got the team working around the clock the whole of this week doing final touches and polishing. It's an 800-page report, very infographic driven, lots of graphics, graphs, and lots of informative insights. There's country profiles on all 54 African countries. There's also comparative analyses across different regions, across different segments. I mentioned that we've broken it down into business, economic, political, and social assessments, and each of those four are broken into 5 different segments, one of which was technology, like I mentioned earlier. So it's a very comprehensive assessment using 19,000 data points to score and rank all 54 African countries, but then also assess top performers and bottom performers regionally and also per quadrant and segment. I see our questions just popped up on how to get copies of the report. So the report can be pre-purchased on On Africa's website, which is inonafrica.com, inonafrica.com, and Global Chamber members do have access to a 20% discount on the report with using the coupon code GLOB-CHAM-ACBR, so that's GlobCham ACBR, 20% discount, and we're also offering a 15% pre-order discount. So if you order the report before the 31st of August, there's a 15% discount on the price of the report. All the information is available on our website, and I'm sure if you want to get that coupon code, you can obviously contact either me or Doug to get that. Yeah, I think that answers the question.
Okay, very good. And we are planning to put a blog post up this week with all of that information for Global Chamber members so you can get that additional discount. So thank you very much. Really very helpful. Vivian, your approach and your description really, I think, was mainly Nigeria focused, and even looking at one country, you know, it's kind of overwhelming in some ways in terms of all the different opportunities there. How can people get involved in the opportunities that you're involved with and that Christian is involved with?
Okay, thank you very much, Doug. Every participant has actually covered every iota of information that is needed with regards to approaching business opportunities. I'm going to borrow from what Jonathan said. I'm looking at it from a research perspective. There's very good need to rely on data, because data never lies. Before ever you venture into any business opportunity whatsoever, there is need for us to do a background check on what is available, what is on ground, to be able to inform you adequately on what you need to do, especially when you've identified your area of interest. Another thing again is building the right team. Just like Gina said, when someone asks the question about elaborating more on prominence, you might have the right purpose, you might have the right place to do your business, but then if you don't have the right team, if your team do not understand what is meant by vision adoption, it's going to go a long way to affect what you want to put in place, because you might want to establish a structure that will run for a long time, and if you don't have the right people who understand your vision, who have adopted it and are ready to carry it on to the very end, is going to affect you. So having good reliance on data, having the right team to work with, and also making an effort to understand the cultural values. Of course, we are here to help out on that, to advise. For instance, we have clients that intend to work in states like Akwa-Ibom and the likes, looking at what business opportunities that the governor of the state has made available for public consumption. We go the extra mile to advise you on how to go about this. What are the things what are the cultural norms that come into play? What are the right approaches to take to be able to take advantage of this? And we also try to advise on regulatory policies. Of course, for every country you're entering into, there are policies that guide foreign investment. So we provide you with information on that to ensure that you're on the right track and you don't get your money lost along the line, or you don't end up wasting your time. So those are the things we do to ensure that people that come on board have effective use of their resources and get value for the money they're investing. And of course, their investments get to serve the populace adequately. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian, very much. And for anyone listening, you certainly can send in inquiries to info@globalchamber.org if for other mechanisms don't allow you to connect up with us more generally or any of the speakers. Erika, wow, how long has this been coming on? I mean, it's this week.
Yes.
So you're just about to jump into the continent. How can people get involved in what you're doing over this next year?
I would say from a business standpoint, we do have offices in Accra, which is where we are headquartered out of, and then also in Nairobi. But there is more information at the Stanford website at Stanford Seed, so you can look that up and then also find out a little bit more about the program. Primarily from a company point of view that's interested in possibly applying to the program, to go through the transformation program, and also to have a coach. You can go look up Stanford Seed at the Stanford website online and find out more about the application process. And that's more for local companies on the ground in the regions, in West Africa and in East Africa. And we're in multiple countries in both regions and expanding quite a bit throughout the regions. And then we're launching in India on Friday. So it's growing as far as the reach of the program.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
the Stanford program is actually also going to be...
It's growing outside of Africa now.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, in other developing economies. So India is a big launch on Friday.
Okay. And is that in the same website for people?
Yes.
Or is it
Yes, absolutely. Same website.
Okay. Very good. Gina, shall you take us home? What words of wisdom do you have, and how do people get more involved in some of the things that you're doing?
One of the things that I would encourage people who are looking at investment and business development, and of course whether it's in Africa or anywhere, what is your risk aversion? Meaning, what can you afford to lose? Because if you don't do your homework, if you don't set your benchmarks, if you really don't take time, like Jonathan mentioned, to do your research, to get the data, and also to go in and verify. Not just, I love the point that he made, very subtle, but he made it. Don't just go into a top level government office or use them as your only source of research. You need to take time, explore the ground, see it with your own eyes, hear it, smell it, taste it, whatever it might be, but to have that hands-on approach. And make your determination, is this a go or is this a no-go? And at each stage of your investment, what is the go and what is the no-go? What are these benchmarks? And make sure that you're referring back to your plan and to your purpose every time. I've seen a lot of businesses go in and they get sidetracked. They see a different rabbit on the trail and then they go on a different hunt and they lose their perspective. So I want to encourage businesses to stay focused. Here at the Sagamore Institute in Indianapolis, where the Indianapolis Global Chamber office is based out of, you can find a wealth of resources and research. There are quite a few touch points already on the continent of Africa, so if you're looking for that type of expertise or skill, certainly we can connect you with people. In addition to the great panelists that you heard today, we can connect you with other panelists and other research that's being conducted on policy initiatives in particular.
Very good. Thank you, Gina. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you all speakers. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. The next Global Chamber Multi-Metro event is actually in coordination with the Polsinelli Law Firm on September 12th. Normally we have 2 to 3 of these a month. And so our next one is in the U.S., 7 locations from the East Coast, New York, Washington, Wilmington, to the West Coast, San Francisco, and places in between, where we have 13 experts on international trade talking about NAFTA and all the things that are going on with trade changes all over the world in all sorts of industries, from aerospace and agriculture to fintech. So September 12th, members are free. Join us. And again, thank all of you for your conversation today, and we'll be following up with both a blog post and other information. Thank you very much.